Did you feel that he sort of hated the watermelon thing at the end? Like one of those things, like say,
Oh yeah.
something like Hunter S. Thompson. Everyone expected him to be the party guy, because that was,
Right.
and he hated that at the end. Was Gallagher like that?
Yeah, I mean it's both like, if it means that he's going to get he would wear Gallagher shirts and stuff. So like he wasn't trying to hide it. So if he was walking around and somebody's like, "Oh, hey, watermelon guy." He liked it cuz it's his claim to fame, but then he also hated it. I mean, in the same way that I'm sure, like when Radiohead got tired of playing Creep or any and it makes complete sense. Like, you do it very much has the feeling of being like a one-hit wonder. And that's just the curse. Hey, I'm Josh Forbes. I am the director of the documentary Gallagher, and yeah, let's talk watermelons.
Yes, that is the voice of director Josh Forbes, and you've tuned into another episode of Comedy History 101, where we school you in comedy. I am Harmon, hello, and Josh is our guest today, where we do a deep dive into his new documentary Gallagher, along with the life and career of comedian Gallagher. Now, for some of you, you might remember Gallagher from the infamous WTF episode, where he stormed off mid-podcast after being grilled by Marc Maron. And for others, you might remember Gallagher from his 14 stand-up comedy specials that ran in the 1980s and 90s, making Gallagher one of the biggest stand-up comedians of that era. And he is most notably recognized by his prop comedy, particularly his signature routine involving the Sledge-O-Matic and watermelons. Josh's documentary on Gallagher just premiered at Doc NYC and is a fascinating character study, not only about a comedian, but also about a very unique human being. All I can say is the third act of the documentary is just fascinating.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Excuse me!
Comedy History 101.
If you grew up in the 80s like me, you probably had that one friend who had cable. I don't remember that friend's name, but I remember who we saw, and it was someone that went on to change my life forever. He had one name, like Madonna or Prince. His name was Gallagher.
I want a couch with style.
I was like 12, 13. To see an adult acting like that. Freedom, there was a silliness.
It was visceral, and it was relatable, and it was fun.
But at the same time, it becomes the only thing people know him for.
He had really smart material, too.
He was really brilliant.
And he garnered a bigger audience and a wider swath and more television than anybody of his era.
So what happened to Gallagher? What happened to that surreal hippie genius I saw as a kid?
I can't get people interested in my comedy. Why in the hell are they interested in the background behind the guy who's writing the jokes we don't give a shit about?
Josh, how are you?
Good. How's it going?
Yeah, really good. First, congratulations on the documentary. I have seen it twice in the last 2 days. That's how much I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
And what I really like is the structure of it. You start at the end, and then you answer the question that some people might have, which I'll present to you for those who don't know. Who is Gallagher?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's what you're trying to answer through your whole documentary.
Yeah. Are we already on? Or is this,
we're going, we're rolling.
Jump into it. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the question. And I don't know if he ever knew the answer to that. Who is Gallagher? Yeah.
Well, in the nutshell, at the time, of course, he was the biggest comic of the era, one of the biggest comics, 14 TV specials in a course of, 15 years. So, he's cranking out a special a year.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a powerhouse. Like he essentially invented like what we know as the TV comedy special, which is pretty amazing. And he did it in a way that nobody else did. I mean, I'm kind of surprised nobody else has followed in his footsteps in terms of like how visual and interactive and that like what a big production he put on. I feel like a lot of comedians now sort of pride themselves in like just being there with a microphone, which is also its own art or whatever. Like that's also that's a feat in and of itself. But it's like, hey, let's have some pageantry and some style, as Gallagher would say.
Yeah, and again, like a majority of people just know him as the Sledge-A-matic watermelon smashing guy, which of course unfolds as both his blessing and his curse.
Yeah,
because that's all they wanted. But again, watching your documentary and the absurdist level of the visuals, I'm a big fan of, say, Buster Keaton, and not to say, on par culture with Buster Keaton, but Buster Keaton played to the genre and created these visual gags, to complement early cinema, where when I was watching your documentary, like the things like the Zeppelin flying through the crowd and the hat with the train going around, and it was like really kind of visually absurdist that.
Yeah. It's funny because a lot of those, like, there isn't really even a punchline to it. Like when you think of Carrot Top jokes and you think of like, I don't know, like a shoe with a horn on it. And it's like, hey, look, it's a shoe horn or something. Like, there's at least a pun there. And then Gallagher had those as well, but like a lot of them were just almost like a performance art piece or something, like the hat with the little train that goes around, like that's just cool, or like his giant couch. It's like, it's not even funny. It's just like whimsical and, I don't know, like it's such a one of a kind, brain to come up with that stuff. Or like the bicycle with a car door. Like it makes no sense, but it's just like it's a delight to your eyes, kind of, I think.
Yeah, he just said, it just adds like a layer to whatever else that he was doing. So it's just like, the couch was kind of like a set piece behind him, and again, as far as like a pageantry of a show, you're just escalating that with this huge couch behind him.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask. So this is. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was this your first documentary?
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm acting like I can't remember the other one. No. Yeah. This is the only one. The only feature documentary.
You come from like directing music videos and TV commercials. What made your very first documentary be about Gallagher?
I've always been obsessed with like outsiders and weirdos and people on the fringes, people who are left out by society. And so I don't know, like it's when I heard him on the Marc Maron podcast and heard how sort of harshly Mark was, you know, grilling him, and just how he responded, and he just was such a weird character. It's like, oh, I remember this guy. I remember, you know, he was a huge influence when I was a kid, and it was like, oh my gosh, this guy's just like a total nut. Like, what's, you know, in the best sense, like this guy's just a complete free spirit. Like, you know, sounds like he's, you know, like I know he was talking, Marc Maron talks about him like trying to scam like free coffee or something, you know. It was just like, what is going on with this guy? Like, even if he wasn't a comedian, even if he was just like a guy that like, I don't know, collected spoons or something, like he just, the way that he acts and the way that he interacts with and looks at the world, I'm like, this is, what a fascinating character study. So yeah, I mean, it was after the Marc Maron thing, I was talking to a friend of mine and I was explaining to him the whole Gallagher 2 story. And my friend Matt Most, who's in the band the Cold War Kids, and I'm like, man, I wish I could do a documentary about this. And he's like, well, what would that cost? And I'm like, I don't know, let me look into it, you know, because he's a rock star and he doesn't have a family, and he was interested in like investing in a film. And so sure enough, I reached out to Gallagher, and after a long courtship of trying to get in there, you know, then I started getting these.
And what was that courtship like? Like, what was his like a reaction at first?
Well, his daughter, Amy, has always been very protective of him, which makes complete sense. And so I think she's used to kind of fielding these like requests and being like, you know, I don't know where you're coming from, or, you know, but I think somewhere in one of my emails, like Gallagher on his website had a list of like his bucket list, Gallagher's, and it was like the craziest stuff, or and not just crazy, but like very lofty. Like, you know, he had this idea of making like family reunion hotels, and you know, he just had all these like really wild things on his list. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, maybe we could try and like see if we can knock some of these off your list. That could be the movie or something. And I think maybe that inspired him, or, you know, sparked some interest in him to write me back. But yeah, at some point it went from me, you know, emailing his daughter to then him jumping in. And when that happened, it was just like these giant, these really giant emails. Because he would just get super enthused about he had all these ideas, right? You know, we sort of show it towards the end of the movie. And yeah, it ended up kind of going back and forth, and eventually, because I was just like, hey, like I just would love to come see some shows, bring a camera, you know. And at a certain point, he was like, okay, you know, let's do it. And I had just suggested like one show, and he's like, well, you know, if you're gonna be out here, you know, I'm doing 3 weeks of shows up and down the coast or whatever. So I was like, all right, let's do it. So yeah, we went to Florida, and I think it was about like a week or two in, that's when he like quit. You know, because part of it was that he really liked the idea of having a free camera crew around, and having some guys who will listen to him, and you know, so he was like, oh, let's go. He had some idea about like, oh, let's go into town, and I'll, you know, I can't even remember what it was. Remember, one of the things was like, I had a dream where I was in the ocean with a toy boat in my hand. Like, let's go film that. I was like, all right. And so
how long was the filming altogether? Like your time, was it over a few years, or was it over a few weeks?
I feel like, I mean, it was like off and on, a week here, a week there, like over like, I think it was like 5 or 6 years at least, or maybe 7 years. Yeah. So it's like, in that situation, you know, we filmed with him for a couple weeks or whatever, and then he got mad because I wanted to film him in a grocery store, you know,
Yeah, tell us about. So, was your idea? I know from the documentary, was your idea like to have them buy like watermelons?
Yeah, I wanted, I don't know, almost like a chef's table sort of like, let's do some, let's do a slow motion, really beautiful Terrence Malick style of him going through the grocery store and getting the melons and plunking them, and I don't know, I just what I the, the way I describe it is, it's like, I don't know, if you're making a documentary about Siegfried and Roy, like you want to see them feeding their tigers, or like you want that backstage, behind the scenes access. And to me, that just would be a very beautiful image, like this old guy who's kind of doing this ridiculous thing, but he's incredibly serious about it, and there's such beauty in that to me. But I guess I didn't really communicate that. He just thought he's
The local,
like a local news guy. You know how many times I've done this? It's like, well, yeah.
Yeah. Did you feel that he sort of hated the watermelon thing at the end? Like one of those things, like say,
oh yeah,
something like Hunter S. Thompson, everyone expected him to be the party guy, because that was
right.
And he hated that at the end. Was Gallagher like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's both, like, if it means that he's going to get, he would wear Gallagher shirts and stuff. So like he wasn't trying to hide it, so if he was walking around and somebody's like, oh, hey, watermelon guy, he liked it because it, it's his claim to fame, but then he also hated it, I mean, in the same way that I'm sure, like when Radiohead got tired of playing Creep, or, and it makes complete sense. Like, it very much has the feeling of being like a one-hit wonder. That's just the curse. It's funny. I shot a commercial with John Cena, and I told him about Gallagher and how he was upset about his the watermelon thing, and John Cena was like, "Oh man, he should be grateful to those watermelons. Those watermelons got him all across the country, man. Those watermelons made him famous, man." I was like, "Dude, you gotta come talk to Gallagher."
Yeah, and what I was surprised by is the depths of fans. Like someone like Bill Burr would be, a fan of Gallagher. Jimmy Kimmel, I mean, I can understand like Letterman, because I did they start out at the Comedy Store around the same time?
Yeah. He was part of that whole crew, I think, of like, Letterman and Leno and Seinfeld and Robin Williams, I think, was sort of known as like somebody who might have pilfered or stolen some of Gallagher's jokes, or
absorbed the stories of that.
Yeah, absorb those jokes, and then
them.
in the heat of the moment they came back out from his subconscious. But yeah, I mean, and it's interesting to me because he really, I don't know, he held on to a lot of resentment, and there's a lot of bitterness towards the success of those guys. I mean, I don't know if there's no like gentle way to put it. It's just like, he would ask me, he's just like, how come Jay has a talk show? How come Dave has a talk show? And I'm like, what I want to say is like, because you don't talk to people, like you do monologues, not dialogues, man. Like, but he never was able to really play by the rules. And I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, he comes across as, I mean, I could see like how what Bill Burr was saying is like, he's sort of like this big kid, coming out on a big wheel. And if you're a kid watching that, it's like kind of like this adult big kid who's breaking the rules.
Yeah.
So for like a little kid, you'd just be, look at this guy.
Right. Yeah. And that's how it was for me. I mean, that was such a revelation of being a kid, and then seeing that, and A, just being marveled by it, and then B, realizing that that is a job you can have. You know, I mean, you can't say his name anymore, but Bill Cosby, like when I saw Bill Cosby himself, that special, like between that and the Gallagher stuff, I was just like, that kind of like blazed a new path in my mind as to what an adult can be, you know, like what you can tell jokes, you can, you know, and people will, you can go all around the country and, you know, you could be silly and have these weird, you know, you can jump around on a giant couch in front of people and they'll pay you and put you on television. Like, this is amazing. Like, sign me up, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and what I loved, you know, well, I don't know if love is the word, but you know, the third act is the demise. And
yeah.
What was like that jump from like, so 95 was his last special to you have him playing Off the Hook Comedy Club in Naples, Florida.
Right.
How does the, and then he's on Pauly Shore's podcast saying, you know, he lost $30 million and he doesn't have it anymore. But it was like, okay, what's being left out in those spaces in between?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were to try to track it, you know, I think he had his high point with all the specials, you know, and as time went on, you know, I think Showtime sort of grew into other programming. But he, you know, he stayed on the road and he kept, you know, I mean, part of his genius is also part of his downfall, I guess, is in that, like, you know, Mike Binder talks about it in the documentary about how he figured out like what cities were Showtime cities and what cities he was popular in. And so he would go and perform in those cities. And I think a lot of them were more, I don't know if you can say rural or, you know, a lot of the places that I would say that Trump also appeals to. And, you know, I think he kind of got stuck in that where he would perform these jokes to these folks that the rest of the world probably doesn't find funny anymore, but these guys think is hilarious. So you can kind of get stuck in this little echo chamber of like, you know, oh, I'm just making Hillary Clinton jokes and everybody thinks it's hilarious. But the outside world is evolving and changing. And so at a certain point, you know, he felt like maybe he couldn't come back or he hadn't evolved his act in a way that maintained freshness or something, you know. So you know, but that's just the basic arc of any artist, is that like you have a point of relevancy and then you know, you sort of drift out of relevancy, but you keep performing. And you know, so there was that. And then I think as that happened, I think he got more bitter and, you know, just angry. And then he started having these heart attacks. I think that, and then there was the brother thing. I think that broke his heart. And then
just explain about the brother thing.
Oh,
Again,
sure.
it's like you have Noel and Liam Gallagher. We have Gallagher and Gallagher 2, Gallagher shooting brothers.
Yeah, I mean, this was probably the number one thing that really inspired me to try and make the movie, is because in any stand-up, in any comedy green room, and you know, in any city, comedians have had this discussion, and the discussion's about, you know, did you know there was a Gallagher 2? You know, and what it was is that the thing that's funny is that there's all these sort of like conspiracy theories of like, oh, I heard it was his twin, and I heard, you know, whatever. But the real story, as far as I know, is so Gallagher's brother, Ron, the way that Ron tells it, he went to, like, there's a radio station that had like some sort of outdoor event or something, like at a car lot, I'm thinking. And it was like a Gallagher lookalike contest. And so Ron showed up with a wig on, you know, looking like Gallagher because he's his brother. And everyone was like, oh my God, Gallagher's here. And he's like, I'm just the brother. And, you know, and I think he started doing some of Gallagher's bits. and like a local guy from like a stand-up club was like, oh my gosh, like this is so funny. Like, would you want to come and do some time on stage? And he's like, sure. And he's like, well, how much can you do? And he's like, I could probably do like 45 minutes, you know. I've because he's like memorized his brother's act. And so he's like, all right, come on out and do it. And so he did and like killed. And then so that sort of, you know, started him into performing as Gallagher in other places. And he asked, so Ron is Gallagher too, and the main Gallagher is Leo. Ron asked Leo, like, hey, what do you think? Like, these guys want me to perform as Gallagher. What do you think? And he's like, you'd be an idiot not to, you know. And he like gave him a seminar, like, hey, you know, come on over and, you know, I'll teach you all my jokes and whatever. And so I think to Leo, it was like, I think it was like just kind of a funny thing. It was a way for his brother to make money. And, you know, I mean, he says it in the movie where he's like, I just wanted a brother who didn't ask me for money.
What was Ron doing before he became Gallagher?
He said he was like selling heavy machinery or something. He was a sales guy. I mean, I think he had I mean, the way he puts it is he had a good career. He had a good thing going. And, you know, I think it's one of these things where like it started out as kind of a fun thing. You know, I mean, Gallagher 1 was like, all right, like he laid some ground rules of like, you know, you can't play any theaters, you can only play clubs, and you can only play in these smaller venues, and, you know, trying to have some sort of barrier, you know, between him and the brother. But I think at a certain point, the brother, Ron had, what happened? Ron had booked a New Year's show, and there was like a club that had, it was like 2 or 3 nights in a row, like leading up to New Year's or something. And he had like sold out all the tickets. And so the club owner was like, hey, instead of doing 3 nights in our club, why don't we, you know, transfer it over and do 1 night in a theater? And so in his head, it's like, okay, I'm not supposed to do theaters, but I mean, it's the same people and it's, you know, 1 night instead of 3 or whatever. So he agreed to do it. And somehow Leo found out and got pissed, you know.
And was that true that he just eventually dropped the 2 part in the name and just just went by Gallagher?
Well, I mean, you know, the part of the gag was that he, you know, like Gallagher 1 loved wordplay so much that he was like, oh, why don't you be Gallagher 2 TOO? You know, but what would happen is you'd see the poster and it would be like, you know, tonight, Elaine Boozler and Gallagher 2. And so you would, you know, you would rightly assume, since it's TOO, that it just means like, oh, and also, you know. And then I think too, yeah, I think that's the case, that like he at some point would drop the 2, or, you know, try to pass himself off as the original Gallagher.
Yeah, and it was like what I found fascinating is from watching the footage in your documentary was, you know, he's doing the exact same bit. He's doing the comb, tomb, womb bit,
Yeah,
but you could tell he just doesn't have the charisma. You know? Yeah, so it's just like, okay, same words, but it's like that innate thing that makes you, you know, so captivating. It wasn't there.
Right. And I mean, you know, maybe there's footage of him, or maybe, you know, maybe he did really nail it and we just don't have footage of it. Because he's a sweet guy and he's charismatic in his own right. But I mean, he doesn't, I mean, I think he would admit it himself, like he doesn't really hold a candle to the original Gallagher, because he's just, you know, a 1 in a million kind of guy. But yeah, I mean, it is, there's, you know, there's something like innately kind of like waiting for Guffman about it all that really like cracks me up.
But I think it's always fascinated the comedy world, Gallagher and Gallagher 2.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And then that's what I mean. It's so funny that what attracted me as well was like people taking seriously something that's so.
Well, I think what fascinated people was, I mean, again, it's like the first thing you think of is watermelon smashing.
Yeah.
And then you just think, oh, there's another watermelon smasher.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
you know, again, they think that's not all the act is.
Right.
And then they're feuding.
Yeah. And then to find out that, you know, because as I started combing through all the specials, that in the special called "We Need a Hero," that he literally did bring his brother out on as part of the show. You know, it kind of, to me, it became this sort of like mystery to unravel. And then I mean it happens in the movie where, like, you know, I'm literally like traveling all over Florida trying to find this guy.
And he just didn't want any part of it initially, or like he never, you know, you shoot him from a distance, but
right.
He just didn't want to be on camera.
Well, I mean, not dissimilar from his brother, he would get hot and cold. Like there's sometimes when I talk to him and he'd go like, okay, yeah, you know, I think, you know, because he would say like, oh, I don't want to, you know, what's in it for me? Like, you know, it's just going to bring up bad memories. And then he would say like, well, you know, the Wikipedia entry about me is like all wrong. And I'm like, well, like, let's
put the record straight.
Yep. Yeah. Let's set the record straight. Like, tell me, you know, like, I want to know, like, this is a thing that people want to know. Like, I want to hear your side. Like, you know, I'm not in it to trash anybody. I just want to find out like what the real story is. You know, a big part of it too, what I really wanted, perhaps naively, was I really wanted to bring them together. That was the initial concept of the movie, was like, let's get these guys together and hug it out and whatever. Like, because I had heard they hadn't spoken in like 15 years. You know, I mean, it's it's funny. I think what inspired that for me was there was a document. I don't know if it's a documentary or TV show about like these like I think it's like Lobster Boy, like from the circus. There was like
Grady Stiles.
Yeah, there you go. But I remember watching this show where it was like, you know, the family of Lobster Boy or whatever, you know, had a falling out, and so for the show they like, you know, set up a meeting and had, I think it was like the mom and the son, or I can't remember what it was, but it was like, it was really moving and fascinating in the way that lights all the lights up in my pinball machine, where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so silly, like ridiculous or weird or, you know, carny, these like lobster people, but but having this incredibly serious emotional reunion. That was kind of the hope, was like, okay, we're gonna bring the Gallaghers together. And you know, that's what I wanted. I mean, what I wanted was to, you know, what I like is I don't know, when you take a topic that seems so silly or seems frivolous, and to really drill in and be like, no, these
are real brothers that don't talk to each other for 15 years.
Exactly. Like this, even if it's silly and about smashing things, like, you know, any of us who ever had a sibling can relate to this, you know, or had any sort of conflict with a friend or a brother or a family member, you know, and almost this idea of like, well, look, you know, from the outside, it looks so ridiculous. Like, well, maybe the reason why you don't talk to your dad is also ridiculous or something. You know, I was basically trying to heal the world, and you know.
Yeah, and do you think, you know, when his demise started coming about, and again, what I was familiar with was the WTF episode with Marc Maron, where when I heard that years ago, I thought, oh, Mark's kind of being an asshole a little bit. And do you think his sort of hateful side was always sort of there, or did it come there because of his demise? Because there was that footage, I think it was in Portland, like on stage, where, you know, again, I heard Marc Maron, you know, rail into him, but I thought it was just like, you know, Bruce Jenner jokes or something like that. But then he's on stage there and it's like, whoa, oh God.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it, I mean, I don't want to like become an apologist for his, you know, for what he's talking about on stage. I do think a lot of it is like a cultural, like, if you look at the way everybody was talking back in the 80s, and I'm not saying that that's the right way to be talking, but like, you know, I think there's a bit of being stuck in his ways. I think he also sort of reveled in feeling like he was outside of these constructs of racism and stuff like that, you know. I think for a lot of comedians, there's this idea of like, hey, everybody's free game. You know, I like when you look at early South Park, there's kind of that anarchic, like, hey, we make fun of everybody. We make fun of Christians and Scientologists and, you know, but that kind of point of view sort of assumes like an even playing field. And I think, you know, as the years have gone on, you know, especially in the Trump era, not to keep bringing up Trump, but like, I feel like people are really realizing like, oh, you know, we're not on the same playing field. We can't all jab at everybody in the same way. And I don't think he got that memo. And it's tough because like, you know, what he's talking about in that Portland podcast, like is partially true. Like there is a distinction in Mexico or in South America between, you know, the indigenous folks and then the colonizers. And so there is this like difference in, you know, you have the lighter skinned folks being on TV and then, you know, whatever, like there's a non-racist basis behind what he's saying, but he can't help himself. So he's like, oh, you got these ones who are, you know, trying to mow your lawn and take your heart out and give it to the sun god or whatever. It's like, I know you're making a joke here, but like, you know, especially the time he was doing it, it's like, dude, like read the room, man. Like, you know, so it's like, was he particularly hateful? I don't know. I think he was like inadvertently hateful. You know, in the way that I think a lot of I don't know, like my grandpa was sort of that way, you know. But you know, it's not an ideal way of talking, yeah, especially in public. But I think with Mark, the way that he drilled him kind of pointed out to me, I don't know, like in our culture right now, like it's always safe to take the attack position. And you know, if you're standing up for like marginalized groups, which even as I'm saying, like I don't want people to think that I'm a bad person, you know. But it's just the truth. Like, you know, one person makes fun of you know, oh, like, hey, isn't it funny that kids slip on ice? And then you could always be the guy who's like, well, those are kids. They're really getting hurt. And how dare you talk about kids slipping on ice or something like that? Like you can always take, and especially like on Twitter or whatever, like you can always take that position and win because it's like you're saying the better thing. So for Mark to just jump in and be like, hey, you know, look at all this material that you've been saying and you know, all that sort of stuff. You know, these jokes about Jenny Craig and lesbians don't lose weight because they can't put Jenny Craig in their mouth when they have Mary Kay on their face, which is like it's not even funny, but there's like a joke math to it that's not trying to be mean. It's just like, oh, there's two women's names and whatever. You know, I feel like Marc Maron, when he was doing that, I think that he was coming at it from a good place, but it's like, I don't know, nobody wants to be held to the fire that had their feet held to the fire that harshly when it's like, hey, I'm just here to, you know, promote my shows or I don't know, whatever, like just talk on a pod. Like I'm sure Gallagher didn't really even know what a podcast was.
Just a couple of last questions here. What did you film that didn't make it into the documentary that you wish did make it into the documentary?
Oh my gosh, there's so much. Like I very much been toying with the idea of compiling everything else and releasing a movie called Gallagher 2 that just has like the B-sides or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we shot that was so funny was so Gallagher has this guy Jimmy Zappas. He pops up in the movie a couple times. He's like plays guitar and stuff, but he is just an amazing character as well. Gallagher had this idea of like, hey, and he called me. It was like after like months of not talking to me, he called me and he was like in the car with Jimmy, and he's like, I got this idea. It's a show called Celebrity Dog Walk and Talk, and Jimmy's the star. Do you get it? And I'm like, I think so. And he's like, and I was like, okay, so it's you walking people's dogs or what? And he's like, no, it's Jimmy. Jimmy has a dog and he'll walk celebrities' dogs, and then the dogs will talk to each other. I'm like, okay. That makes no sense. And so I shot a pilot or a sizzle with Jimmy and his dog, and a friend of mine is married to Hillary Duff. And so we had Hillary Duff's dog talking to Jimmy's dog, and we went around Hollywood, and so we have this whole little sizzle. Like that's one of these things that I'm like, man, it's so funny to me. Because we really jazzed it up. Like we really wanted it to be like, all right, like what would this actually look like if it was a show? And so that's something that I would have liked to have included. But there's also we everywhere we went with we went to a bunch of different things with Gallagher, and
a friend of mine told me that he was a regular at CES Expo in Vegas.
Yeah, he was a genius, and he was a chemical engineer, but he definitely had, he was big on technology. Like that's, you see him in the movie, like with one of the earliest video cameras. Like he was a big tech, geek or whatever.
Yeah. Do you think though I mean, you have him like in the end, he's pitching like the spaghetti sauce.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a good idea, or do you think he was sort of like not losing it, but maybe losing it? I don't know how to frame it.
I mean that's the thing is like all these ideas he had a kernel of good in them, like I remember, I don't know, as a kid there was a restaurant we'd go to called Around the Corner, and the whole gimmick was that like you had a phone, and instead of a waiter coming by, you would like order on the phone. It, like that feels like a Gallagher restaurant. Spaghetti's Ready, a restaurant where there's like spaghetti sauce coming out of a spigot in the wall, like, or in the center of the room, or a guy comes and like boils the spaghetti. I don't know. It's like, is that any crazier than Benihana's? Or I don't know, so, but I think, I mean, what made it so, I don't know, like quixotic, I guess, or just sad and funny, is that it's like, he has all these ideas and they're all pretty good, but because of who people think he is, and just, I don't know, like just his lack of like he doesn't know anybody in the restaurant business necessarily, like he's just unable to get them off the ground. And I think that just that killed him. And it's all the more tragic because like I think a lot of the ideas were good. Like, this idea he had for a slot machine, like I still don't fully understand what it was, like with the birds on the wire dropping or something, but like, in another lifetime he could have easily been a guy who worked for one of these companies that makes these gadgets or whatever. Or he had one thing we weren't able to fully get into the movie, but he would talk endlessly about this movie he wanted to make called Enhedawana. And it was about this like early, like the first woman poet or something, and the first, I don't know, the first princess superhero-y type. I don't know. Like it's like in the same way that like any sort of Disney, Moana or any, I don't know, like it felt like that level of a character. Like, wow, like this, and this has such a beautiful world, and like, she has these like magic abilities or something in his story. And, it's like, it's totally crazy, but it's like, it's not any crazier than Avatar or any of these other big movies. But like, he just wasn't able to get it made, you know. But it's also like, well, dude, it's like a $300 million movie. Like, what do you like, you know, and you're the watermelon guy. Like, how do you, and I tried helping him so much. I was like, well, let's, you know, I'm like, is there a script? You know, it's like, why would I write a script if people are gonna change it?
Okay, so it's just like, yeah.
Like,
did you feel like through working with him 5 years, did you feel like you were a friend to him and he was your friend, or do you feel there was always a distance?
I'd say both. I think that all of his friends, even as his closest friends, felt that distance. I think, you know, there was definitely a relationship. It was almost more like a father son, or like a, you know, he reminded me so much of my grandpa, and he would just call me up out of the blue to like help him log into his Gmail, or, you know, or, you know, yeah.
He's the gadget guy, and he couldn't figure
right. Or, you know, I need, you know, how do I download this off of here? You know, so I'd get called for tech support and stuff like that. And, you know, or if he had some idea, like, how do I get in touch with Mike Tyson? He would like call me. I don't know, dude. I don't know how to. Yeah, so there was definitely like there was definitely a relationship there, and it was very emotional.
What did you get me?
Someone,
Caitlin, we can hear you.
So when you're like, you know, just a few last questions here. When you're going to like the later shows, were they?
This is what I was for.
She doesn't know that she's not muted.
Able to mute her,
or maybe there's a mute. Hold on 1 second.
That's hilarious.
All right, I think I can mute her. 1 sec.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so when you were just a couple last questions here. When you're going to those like last shows of his, you know, say Off the Hook Comedy Club, was and again in the documentary when it becomes the third act, you know, going from those elaborate set pieces with like a big, you know, room-sized couch from, you know, floor to ceiling to basically a plastic backdrop where he's spray painting his name, and it just kind of looks really kind of shabby. Was the crowd still coming out? Was it like always a full crowd, or?
I think he was able to draw quite a crowd. I mean, surprisingly, I guess, to a degree. But I guess in the same way that, like, you know, like when Pauly Shore goes on tour, like, you know, especially if you're in a smaller town where it's like you're not getting visited by the Bill Burrs of the world or whatever, you know, you'll see these folks and it's like, I like that guy. That guy's cool, you know. No, this will be fun. So, you know, I mean, there were smaller venues, but there's definitely like a circuit for those kind of folks. I mean, it's side tangent, like Pauly Shore did a documentary. I can't remember what it's called right now, but it's great. It kind of inspired this movie as well, where he filmed himself like on the road.
Yeah, with a seat counter.
Yeah. And that's, I really like that sort of warts and all, like, hey, this is what showbiz is at this level and at this point in my life. And I'm just such like a showbiz junkie. Like I don't know, I'm like I love circuses and clowns and carnivals and you know, theatrics and stuff. Like it's to me, it's like all part of the same story, you know, like traveling acting troupes in the Middle Ages, you know, to now. It's like, to me, it's all the same thing. So I really get off on that. Like it's, you know, there's something really beautiful about it. But yeah, so he was able to draw crowds, but, you know, and he was able to dazzle them and throw a party in a way that he does. You know, I mean, unfortunately, like one of the big things is like when you smash, it makes a huge ass mess. And not every place is prepared for that. Not everybody wants to clean, you know, watermelon seeds off the ceiling. And so that, again, that was sort of the blessing and the curse, was like, you know, the thing that everybody wanted him to do. Like he wasn't, you can't just like make a crazy mess at just a random comedy place. And so I think that definitely hurt the experience for the audiences. I think he still put on a great show. Like, I mean, I do think that he was one of the best comedians in so many ways. Like, I think, you know, even like visual sight gags aside, like the way that he could run a crowd and the way, because it was very much like a jazz musician or something. Like he had all these jokes in his back pocket and you could see him dodging and weaving and like, oh, they're grabbing onto this and okay, now, oh, that's really got him upset. Let's push him over the edge. And then, we've lost the group and now we're going to get him back. And, he was a master at all that stuff. But the thing is too, is those are the elements of the craft that like a layperson won't see in the same way that you see a magician and you just think they're really good at manipulating cards, but you don't realize they've been manipulating you the whole time with their words and setting things up and misdirection and all that stuff. Like that's what he was a master at, but no one, unless you're somebody who's well-versed in kind of like dissecting comedy, like you don't see that. You just think like, what a goofball.
Yeah. And it's two last questions here. So you mentioned the movie is Citizen Kane, but with watermelon smashing. So what is Gallagher's Rosebud?
What is his Rosebud? I mean, I think in some ways, maybe it's the mallet, but he already had that. Maybe it was just the love of his father. I think that was maybe the thing he was always searching for or wanted.
Yeah, because you had that thing where his dad was taking credit for the watermelon smashing. Senior, yeah.
I mean, that was the Citizen Kane thing. I mean, obviously, it's like it's an ironic, funny joke, or whatever. But we did kind of approach it like that, where Citizen Kane is very much this like exploded view of one person's life, and like at different points in that movie, we'll like, let's zoom into his childhood. And all right, now here he is at this point in his life. And, we definitely like sort of saw that as a roadmap. But yeah, I mean, maybe the thing he was always missing was just the feeling of being valued, feeling of being valued by the audience, the feeling of being respected in the same breaths as Richard Pryor or Carlin or something like that.
In that later era when he was like on Letterman during later era Letterman, was it just Letterman felt that kinship to him from the early days of the Comedy Store when probably no one else would put him on this talk show that Letterman had him on the talk show?
Yeah. And I think Letterman knew full well where Gallagher was in his life, especially when he had that heart attack. I mean, I think,
and that footage is like, yeah, I never heard about that or saw that.
Oh,
again, he's up there with comedian Tommy Cooper, who had a heart attack on stage. It's like, it's happened before.
Or something like, in many ways, it's like, you hear from folks where it's like, that's the dream or that's the goal, is like
what he's loving to do.
Yeah.
But he's still die in the end. So it's like always the outcome's really not that great.
Right. But just the timing of it, like,
and it's like it's during a mallet smash.
Yeah, he's just like in the rug. I mean, that moment to me kind of like that's the movie in a way, where it's like this guy gave his life for the audience and for this like completely ridiculous thing that he knew, that everybody knew was ridiculous. And that's kind of, I don't know, I guess the whole point of like absurdist anything is pointing out how absurd the universe is and how weird everything is, and sort of just reveling in it, like being alive is just as bizarre as like, smashing a watermelon, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. And I just love those final shots when you have him like looking very frail, shirt off, smashing the watermelon with a fiery mallet.
Yeah.
I mean, just great imagery that kind of just sums up the whole journey.
And it's funny because when he read me that poem in his hotel room, like I think the first day that we had met, and I mean, he read a couple different poems. Like there's a moment in there where he finishes one poem and I'm like, oh, that's sad, and he's like, no, it's not, we're laughing. And I think that might have actually been part of the poem that he reads at the end. And it's funny because like in some ways he had no self-awareness, and in other ways he had like laser sharp self-awareness. That poem he's reading, it's him, like that's about him. like that's about a singer singing their last song or something, but like, you know, it's not too hard to see the subtext is like, this is what it feels like to have once been a great, you know, opera singer, and now you're singing your last song. And I like what I love so much about that moment is just how, I don't know, for better, for worse, like all the bridges he burned, all the accolades he, you know, all the awards he won, like all the amazing accomplishments that he had, and all the crap that he pulled, you know, at the end of the day, it was all, you know, he's like, it's all for me, you know, this song is all, and I mean,
it's a very Sid Vicious singing My Way moment.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, you know, I don't know, he knew what he was doing. Like he set his course and he hit it, you know. I think it's funny. Like, yeah, such an interesting guy. I remember like after that performance at Marina Del Rey, when he was gonna go and perform, and he's just like, I'm not feeling it, you know. I ended up having to take him home to Palm Springs, and as we're driving there, the dark and it's quiet, and you know, I'm just afraid of him getting mad at me or something. And out of nowhere, he's just like, I think I was the best. And I'm like, what? Like the best at what? You know, comedy? And he's like, yeah, I think I was. And it's like just such a wild thing to say when it's like, okay, like you just chickened out of this show. Not chickened out, but like you just turned down a show where people were there to see you, and that, you know, but even the amount of people wasn't like that impressive, and now you're riding with me. Like, who am I? Like, you know. But he held that attitude towards the end of just like, no, I think I'm the best, and I think in many ways he was.
Very cool. I think we should leave it at that. That's a good closing statement. Josh, thanks so much, and congratulations on the documentary. Where can people find it?
I think until December 1st, you can like rent it. Like you can go to Doc NYC, and I think you can pay a ticket and stream it. But you know, I have my little Netflix mug. You know, we're looking for streamers to come scoop it up, or we're looking for, you know, a home, because I think you know, it'd be fun if Showtime decided to pick it up.
There we go. Yeah, the 15th Showtime Gallagher special.
Exactly. Yeah. So hopefully it'll find a home somewhere where everybody can see it.
And where can people find you?
I am on I'm on Instagram as Best Josh Forbes. There are many Josh Forbes.
Only one best.
I'm the best. So I'm there on Instagram, and my website's joshforbes.com. Yeah. And then I have another movie that came out earlier this year. That's a narrative film. It's a horror comedy called Destroy All Neighbors, starring Jonah Ray and Alex Winter and Tom Lennon, and you know, all sorts of great people. So check that. You can see that on Shudder. You can that's out. That's available, or Amazon, or wherever you want to, you know, stream movies. So
very cool, Josh. It was really great meeting you, and I love the stories, and I love the documentary.
Great to meet you as well.
All right.
It.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Comedy History 101.